Hello, strangers. You're just in time. You've turned your dial all the way to the edge, past the crackling, and found Neon Static, where every Tuesday you'll hear a true scary story you can't find anywhere else. I'm your host, Vi, who faced a horror story of my own this week when, in my car, I found the forgotten blender bottle from a protein shake I'd had 2.5 weeks ago. And let me tell you, I tried ammonia, I tried bleach, I even tried rubbing alcohol, but it's tainted forever. And sometimes you just have to learn to let go. And that lesson fits beautifully with today's story about what happens when someone has a hold of something and won't let it go. It's story 68, and it goes like this. Some context about me that you'll need for this story to make sense. I am a girl, and I grew up fat. It ran in my family. Yeah, the only thing that ran in our family. I've heard that joke before. When puberty hit, it brought greasy hair, skin, braces, and glasses. Obviously, it was hard enough to make friends, let alone dare to dream for any romantic relationships. The weird thing is, by the time Toby had met me, a lot had changed. Puberty had been brutal, but medication, Accutane, had cleared my skin. My braces had come off, and contacts had replaced the pink-framed glasses I'd been rocking since 5th grade. I'd even become friends with some of the kids at school who were in JROTC, Junior ROTC. With their encouragement, I'd met them for runs and calisthenics. I spent afternoons doing bizarre-to-me things like flipping tires, pushing a sled, and so many burpees. I shed a lot of my fluff before I knew it. On the outside, I was no longer not the cute one, I guess. But inside, oh man. I still labored under the belief that in spite of all the things I had to offer, physical beauty would never be on the menu. Well, Toby was a second year at the local community college. He showed up to an event with his ROTC group, rolling up in a Dodge Charger, jet black and showroom clean. He was undeniably gorgeous. He had dark, wavy hair, cut in one of those shaved-to-skin on the sides, long on top cuts. He had bright blue eyes and a tall, strong frame that told you this guy didn't waste time in the gym. All the girls in our JROTC group swooned. Not me, though. My broken brain being what it was, I didn't even consider him a dating option. And because of that, I was able to relax. The things I was gifted at, being smart and having a pretty good sense of humor, took over. I didn't make him laugh like I could with the others, but whenever I'd glance his way, he'd lock eyes with me. One day, as I was leaving with my JROTC crew, he asked if I too was in JROTC with them. When I said no, he asked me for my socials, specifically if I had Snapchat. When I looked confused, he added, "Well, how else will I see you again?" I was surprised, but I pulled out my phone and traded snaps with him. And for about a week or two after, I saw him check every one of my snaps. He didn't post a lot himself, but I returned the favor and looked at what he did post. Mostly it was sunrises outdoors, with captions inferring he'd taken them after some immense early morning workout. But about 3 weeks in, he posted a shirtless picture. I got nervous looking at it, like I shouldn't have been looking at all. This was a thirst trap. My brain quickly told me it was not only not for my eyes, but that he'd be embarrassed to know I'd seen it. I clicked through it quickly. I felt uneasy long after I'd made it through the rest of his snaps and put my phone away. At least until I heard it ding in my pocket. I opened my phone and my stomach dropped. Direct message from Snapchat. Guess who? 3 little words with an eye emoji. Caught you peeking. And I did feel caught, having done something wrong, even though he'd posted it publicly. Thank God typing doesn't give away nerves. I wrote something back like how it wasn't my fault he'd sent it out to everyone, when it was clearly for his girlfriend only. Then, feeling a little bratty, I dropped a tongue-out emoji and put my phone down to finish getting ready for school. When I got in my car and went to plug in my phone to listen to my tunes on the ride to school, I saw he'd replied. No girlfriend yet. The one I'm auditioning for, the part, needs to keep her tongue in her mouth. For now. I was stunned. My brain wasn't understanding. I apologized for offending him and started my drive, eager for a distraction from the blush of embarrassment that seemed to make my brain melt. The whole thing was so dumb. Why was he giving me such a hard time for looking at a pic that he had posted? He knew I was a mutual. He'd looked at all my snaps, mostly cooking and game nights, and pictures of the wretched tire that we flipped at J-Rotzi. We named it Black Betty. But now here he was, teasing me about the emoji I used to try and turn my seeing him shirtless into not a big deal. For everyone listening to this, yes, I now understand that what he was doing was flirting. Now please understand that 17-year-old me didn't know that. Well, after that, we still snapped back and forth. In full goofy girl form, my snaps were initially just my forehead and hair, or the ground. But he seemed annoyed by that. He directly told me I should send him post-workout pictures. The day he asked, I'd just gotten home from a workout, and I was sticky with sweat. I looked like a train wreck. No way was I taking a picture of that. So instead, I snapped him a picture of my dog's butt, saying something snotty like, "This wagon I'm dragging don't need no workouts. It's perfection already." He didn't joke back. His response had the caption, "Send me one like this." The picture this caption was on was another one that made me feel like I'd seen something I shouldn't have, like wandering into the TV room when my parents were watching a movie with a racy scene. He was shirtless again in the picture, leaning against his pillows in bed. I did as I was asked, cringing. Despite multiple retakes, I just looked like a big old dork. But with a burst of confidence, thinking, well, let him see this and see it's not on his level, and he'll drop this weird, uncomfortable game of acting like he's interested in me, I sent it with the eye roll emoji. I got back one snap. The text, "Next time, no shirt." It went on like that for a while. In person, especially in our group of friends, he acted chill. He never hinted at us having spoken in any other setting. But on Snapchat, he began to accelerate. He started sending me more and more risque material and insisted I owed him the same. Having never been in this position, I was lost as to what to do. I'd never had any sort of interest in me like this. He was impossibly attractive and well-liked. My brain was still stuck repeating the same unkind things I'd been called from grade school on. It was exciting, it was exhilarating, and I was terrified of messing it up. So, I sent the pics. He asked me more and more personal questions too, sussing out my inexperience. What's more, he started saying some strange, way too fast things. He snapped me about bizarrely forward things, like sending me a picture of an SUV with the caption, "I could see you driving this as my wife." Wife? We weren't even dating. Mix this with every public encounter being like we barely knew each other, and you'll understand how I spent months feeling off-kilter, maybe even crazy. I would have asked my friends about it. I mean, I did find ways to ask about him, but only very casually. I was scared to death of my friends laughing at me, at the joke of someone like him having an interest in someone like me. While the general consensus was that Toby wasn't someone that anyone in our friends group knew too well. I wanted to press them and ask what that meant, but fearing that asking too much and pressing for details would come across like I was creeping on him, I didn't. I didn't talk to any of my friends about Toby, or the things he was saying, or the increasing demands for pictures, dirty ones. The whole thing was incredibly isolating, even when I was still getting invited to events with my JROTC friends. At this point, the guy in charge of JROTC asked why I didn't just join myself. I was considering it. The topic came up at another event, with my friends egging me on, talking excitedly about joining up and serving together when we got through high school. I drove the group of us to the event, and the whole way they were pumped, describing us going through boot together, demanding the aux cord to play high-tempo songs. It was just so much fun. After months of feeling twisted up about Toby, I really needed their camaraderie. And they kept it up throughout the day. We were lining up for a shuttle event, just field day athletics stuff. My friends were still excitedly talking about it, loud enough for the group behind us to overhear. And that group included, who else? Toby, who was also at this event. He kept his face neutral and didn't say much about it, just sort of nodded and smiled a bit. But a few minutes later, he got up to use the restroom. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. It was Toby, snapping me about the conversation. He was no longer playing it cool. He was very unhappy that I was considering joining JROTC. "I don't want my wife around a bunch of army dudes," he wrote. What was this thing about him calling me his wife? I was so confused why he'd play it so calm in front of others, yet clearly have such a problem with it. He was so hot and cold, and I was left second-guessing everything with him. I decided to just ignore his snaps, pretending I'd left my phone in my car. It was a good excuse. As I'd driven, all my friends left their random water bottles, spare t-shirts, and what have you in the car. They kept coming to me and asking about my keys to go get their stuff out. Looking back, I think one of them must have forgotten to lock it. Or maybe they didn't forget, and just thought it would automatically lock. That's the only likely explanation for what happened later. The next morning, I got into my car, starting it up as I reached for my water bottle to take a drink. I paused there long enough for my phone to connect to the car via Bluetooth, except the little pop-up said, "Connected to iPhone." I don't have an iPhone. I have an Android, always have. I plugged my phone into the cord directly, and a moment later, the Android app came up. I thought it was weird, but I figured maybe my mom's phone, which was an iPhone, had been in range. I was still in the garage, so it seemed like that could have happened. I shrugged and drove off to do my errands, including another meetup with the JROTC instructor to go over the program more in depth. We met at a Starbucks out by the airport. It was one I'd never been to, but I guess was close to where the instructor lived. We talked for around an hour, and away from both my friends and Toby's influence, I was able to think really seriously about joining, both the benefit and the commitment of it. So I was happy I'd gone, and in a good mood as I drove back home. That night, though, my phone started buzzing again. Toby sending me snaps. At first they were casual, but then he asked a weird question. "Got family visiting?" I wrote back, "Nope, just my mom and dad." His reply came quick. "Friend, maybe?" Now I was really confused. I sent back another message saying that no one was visiting, bracketing my confusion with a lol and a laughing emoji. He seemed to let it go then, changing tacks as to ask what else I'd been up to. Now, I knew bringing up meeting with the JROTC lead would go badly, so I didn't mention it. I just went over the other things I'd done, some shopping, taking my car through the car wash, and then I asked him about his day. But he didn't tell me about his day. Instead, he asked if I'd maybe taken up rock climbing. If that seems like a complete non sequitur to you, then you and I feel the exact same way. I put my phone down, not sure what he was on about. I wondered, had he seen me somewhere and was trying to catch me out? Or is it that he can somehow tell I'm leaving something out and he's randomly guessing? I knew there was a relatively new rock climbing gym in town. Well, on the outside of town, over by the airport. My stomach sank. How had he known I'd been out there that way? I was so confused, but also feeling scared, paranoid that he'd been following me, watching me somehow. Was he watching me now? I finally picked up my phone, again softening my reply with another emoji or two, but reaffirming I hadn't been out that way. If he had a picture of me, I figured then I'd be able to ask what he was doing with such a picture. But after my response, he stopped responding altogether. The next weekend, I picked up a friend and drove us to the movies to see a late show. As we drove, he was fiddling with his phone, and he ended up dropping it right when I was making a turn. It ended up skidding over the floor mat and back under the passenger side seat. I parked in the lot as he fished around under the seat, trying to locate it. It was dark enough that when his fingers brushed against it, a little light shone out from under the seat. He grabbed at it and pulled his hand out. But he wasn't holding his phone. He was holding an iPhone. A random iPhone neither of us had ever seen before. There was a cable connected to it. As he pulled this, a battery pack slid out from under the seat to which the iPhone was connected. He and I looked at each other, him in confusion, me in dawning realization that made my head spin and my ears ring. So that's how he knew. He'd known I'd been out by the airport. My friend asked me, "Hey, are you all right? What is this?" He could tell from my face that I was scared. I ended up telling him my suspicion that Toby had planted it. He went from concerned to confused, and in explaining why Toby would do such a thing, I ended up telling him everything. The weird snaps, the hot and cold of him in public versus how he spoke to me in private, the weird pictures he was always asking me for, and how they made me feel wrong and confused. Given that this was Snapchat and I never screenshot any interactions, it tells when you do that. I couldn't show him any of it, but I could at least show my friend the streak score, confirming that Toby was in daily contact with me and had been for some time. As I spoke, my friend's face went again from surprise to anger. He barely checked my phone for the streak score. He told me he believed me outright, gesturing at me with the discovered iPhone as he decisively turned it off. He was adamant that I confront Toby right then and there. He offered to do it for me if I couldn't bear to. I balked. While this friend had my back, I was terrified that pissing Toby off would set him off somehow. And I still had that self-esteem issue. While this friend believed me, well, he'd had to, given he'd been the one to find Toby's creepy attempt to track me. Would anyone else believe me? Would anyone else look at Toby, a handsome, charismatic boy, and think that he'd be interested in me? I told my friend I'd rather just block him on everything. My friend didn't like this as much, but when I told him that I'd stay close to him at J-Rotzi events when Toby showed up, he sort of puffed his chest back up. He seemed satisfied with having a part to play in defending me. We ended up catching that late movie. It was good. For the first time in a long time, I knew that Toby was blocked, not only from his accounts being banned from contacting me, but also from the weight of carrying everything about him. I felt myself sort of uncoil from a tension I'd been carrying for months. Relief at the secret not being a secret anymore, and having a good reason to put an end to something that had me feeling unsettled at every turn. It felt amazing. I was still riding that elation as me and my friend left the theater and walked across the dark lot to my car. But as we left the theater, I was struck with knowing. I just knew. Somehow, out in that dark parking lot, someone was watching me. I couldn't play it cool. I began whipping my head around, trying to catch sight of whoever was staring at me. My friend noticed. He began looking around too. As he did, he started to point and say, "Hey, isn't that..." And a pair of headlights on a car a few rows away came on, LED bright. A deep engine sound as the car he'd begun to motion at accelerated out of its space and left the lot quick, speeding out of there. I could just make out what kind of car it was from the overhead streetlights. A Dodge Charger. And I only knew one guy who for certain drove a jet black Dodge Charger. I assume he'd seen the phone, the one he'd planted in my car without my knowledge, with location services turned on, turn off when my friend discovered it. Maybe he thought it had run out of juice and came to see if he could swap out the battery pack. I felt my knees turn to jelly, even as my friend turned to me, already telling me he too recognized the car and knew who drove it. I felt myself start to shake, even as everything felt numb. My friend slung an arm around my shoulder and led me to the car as I began to sob. The next few weeks were brutal. I kept waiting for the next move, the next play. I did end up joining JROTC, and I kept my same group of friends, some of whom I'm still friends with today. And I kept going to events, prepared to see Toby there, but sold in the knowledge that I had my friends around. And as scary as he was, he'd always remained so chill and cool around them. No way he'd blow the secret of our contact now. After weeks became months and months became years, I assumed that Toby had either transferred or quit ROTC, because I didn't see him again, and the coast felt clear. There was one more piece to this story, and I didn't find out about it for some years. Not too long ago, I was speaking to my friend, the same one that had found the iPhone lodged under my seat, and I happened to mention that I felt lucky that that night had been the end of it, and how lucky I was that for all the events after, events that Toby had previously been a staple, he never appeared again. My friend paused and looked down before finally taking a breath and telling me that wasn't luck. See, Snapchat tells you if someone takes a screenshot on the phone. Snapchat has no way of knowing, however, if someone uses a different phone or a camera to take pictures of that phone with the snap pulled up. He had collected those pictures of me, and he had taken them to the JROTC lead, hoping to get me kicked out or barred from joining based on behavioral issues. Little did he know, my friend had gone to the JROTC lead first, sort of looking out for me, letting the lead know that if I continued to go to JROTC events, they had to keep an eye out for Toby. The lead put two and two together, and once you considered my age, technically, 17 is still under the age of consent. Well, Toby stopped showing up at those events because Toby was no longer welcome to JROTC or ROTC. Not after the JROTC lead went to the college and told the guy in charge of ROTC what Toby had done. Maybe it's just because it's come up so recently, but every so often, I'll see a certain car, an SUV he'd snapped me, or a purse on a TV show actress, and I'll remember his weird insistence about how he could see his wife driving this, wearing that. And in my head, I resolve to never drive or own any of it. And that's story 68. Okay, admit it. Did everyone else eye roll when they got to the car that Toby drove? Of course it was a Dodge Charger. Or a Challenger. Just enlistment bonus things, I guess. From the poll that I put on the community page last week, it should appear that trailers are coming back. That's not the announcement that I hinted at. Just something that I wanted to affirm here for the folks that have stayed on this channel this long. No, the announcement's something else. and I think it's something that you're gonna like. It's kind of the reason this channel exists in the first place. Dun dun dun. If you'd like to reach out and drop a line, social media and email are in the description. Liking, commenting, and subscribing is of course wonderful. I see it, and I love each and every bit of it. But honestly, I'm just so happy you tuned in today. And until next time, take care, strangers.